Hello and welcome to ThePrint. I am Aamaan, and in our great speeches series today, we look at a lecture delivered by jurist and constitutional lawyer Nani Palkhivala titled The Constitution and the Common Man, delivered in Bombay in 1971. We revisit this lecture as the Supreme Court continues to hear cases touching on property rights and constitutional guarantees. Palkhivala was one of India's foremost constitutional lawyers. He argued landmark cases before the Supreme Court, including the Kesaramanda Bharti case in 1973, which established the basic structure doctrine. He also delivered celebrated budget speeches that drew tens of thousands to Bombay's Brabourne Stadium every year. In 1971, with Indira Gandhi's government pushing constitutional amendments to curtail fundamental rights, including the right to property, Palkhivala delivered this lecture defending the constitution and the common man it was built to protect. At the time, the constitution listed 7 fundamental rights. The right to property was among them. It was removed in 1978 through the 44th constitutional amendment and downgraded to a legal right. Property rights had been the second most debated provision in the Constituent Assembly and the most amended. Palkhivala began his 1971 speech by stressing that the Constitution was designed for the common man and that it not only allowed but also encouraged the creation of wealth. He said, "Political freedom and civil liberty are the keystone of the Indian Constitution. Our Constitution is primarily shaped and molded for the common man. The only persons who would be disappointed with our Constitution are those who believe in outdated ideologies, which can only result in leveling down and not leveling up. The Constitution believes in the distribution of wealth, and therefore it not only permits but encourages the creation of wealth. That is why our Constitution confers on all citizens the fundamental rights to acquire, hold, and dispose of property." End quote. He then argued that in a country as diverse as India, fundamental rights were not a luxury but an absolute necessity, and that the present moment was the worst possible time to amend them. He said, "With our varying and widely divergent creeds and ideologies, and a wide variety of religions and languages, our country is preeminently a country where inalienable fundamental rights are an absolute necessity. With the growing sense of insecurity in different states, when fanaticism of all sorts, regional, linguistic, communal, and economic, is gathering momentum, it would be not merely a mistake but a betrayal of the fundamental freedoms to enable Parliament to trifle and tinker with them." End quote. On the right to property specifically, Palkhivala dismissed the socialist critique of it as superficial. He said, "The right to property is often derided as the least defensible right in a socialist democracy. Yet a little reflection would show that this right is of the essence of a sound body politic and of a democracy which aims at marching forward economically." End quote. He argued that abolishing it would run against human nature itself. He said, "It is a sad reflection on human nature that a man will work for himself and his family as he will work for no one else. Until this law of human nature is changed, the abolition of the right to property can meet with nothing but disaster." End quote. The jurist then pointed out that no democracy in the world denied the right to property, citing countries such as the United States, France, and Germany. He said, "There is no democracy anywhere in the world where, as a matter of law and of constitutional practice, the right to property is not respected. Even in communist countries like the USSR, the right to private property in the fruits of personal labor and the right to inherit such property are recognized." End quote. Palkhivala then described India's right to property as the most flexible and abridged in any free democracy. He said, "Far from there being any need to abridge the fundamental right to property further, the truth is that perhaps in no free democracy of the world does the right to property exist in such an abridged and attenuated form as it does in India." End quote. This made retention of the right even more urgent, he argued, precisely because of India's political climate. He said, "Countries where freedom has become a way of life can do without the luxury of a constitutional right to property. But in India, where economic fanaticism has become a way of political life, it is imperative to retain the right to property." End quote. Palkhivala also addressed the argument that the constitution itself was holding back development, calling it the greatest fraud perpetrated on the Indian people. He said, "The myth has been sedulously propagated by wily politicians that it is the constitution which stands in the way of the nation's economic progress and the uplift of the masses. The truth of the matter is that it is the wooden headed and disaster economic policies of the governments at the center and in several states which are truly responsible for the miseries of the unemployed and the many more millions who, though employed, are still living below the minimum subsistence level. There is not a single sound economic policy or scheme for social development of the masses which is in the slightest degree hampered or hindered by any of the provisions of the Constitution. End quote. Palkhivala cited the Supreme Court's judgment in the Privy Purse case as a warning about what happens when constitutional guarantees are treated as expendable. He said, breach of any of the constitutional provisions, even if made to further a popular cause, is bound to be a dangerous precedent. Disrespect to the Constitution is bound to be broadened from precedent to precedent, and before long, the entire Constitution may be treated with contempt and held up to ridicule. That is what happened to the Weimar Constitution. End quote. He concluded with a call to action directed at those who believed in fundamental rights but remained silent. He said, the overwhelming majority of thinking men strongly believe in the fundamental rights and are deeply conscious of the outstanding role played by the courts in preserving our cherished values. But unfortunately, they constitute the silent majority. There are times in a country's history when inaction and silence can be culpable wrong, and we are living in such times. We must take active steps to see to it that falsehood does not have a very long innings before the ultimate moment of truth arrives. End quote. Thank you for joining us on Great Speeches. For more from The Print, become a subscriber at theprint.in/subscribe. I am Aamaan in Delhi.